Hey everyone, this is Masood Ramandi and I'm happy to be back after a few weeks with another session from our new series, God's Master Plan. So far we have covered from Genesis 1 to Genesis 11. We've gone through the story of Adam and Eve. We've gone through the story of Abel and Cain, and then the story of Noah, and then eventually the story of Babylon. And we've seen that how everything actually starts with the story of a seed and grows to become something in a bigger scale. So as God planted everything as a seed in the beginning and caused them to grow, so also he said to man, he said, be fruitful and multiply. On the evil side, we see that actually the human effort that started with Cain and how he tried to actually make something out of the ground that was cursed and cause that to give something, and out of that to bring an offering to the Lord, to be recognized. That one person became eventually a whole nation, a kingdom called Babylon in chapter 11. And in that story, what happened was actually they tried to make for themselves a name by becoming a city. That's what it actually says. Rose talked to you about this in the last session, but today I'm going to show you that actually out of that effort and the whole nation that was made, God called someone out and he started with him again something in the form of a seed, and his purpose was to put an end to everything that man was doing and to build something that he himself wanted to do, which was to actually have a city, a kingdom, this time not of the earth, not of human effort, but of God, and to give them a name, not the name that they make for themselves, but the name of the Father on them, that everyone should be called sons of God or a son of God. So let's quickly get into this message. So in Genesis chapter 12, we read the story of Abraham, and which is, by the way, Abram, and Abraham means an exalted father. God comes to Abraham in chapter 12 and he says, let me actually read this quickly for you. Genesis chapter 12. It says, now the Lord had said to Abraham, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. Okay, so here when it says get out of your country, from your family, when you look at the word family, it literally means from your birth, or you can say from your birthplace. The same word is translated as native land in the previous chapter. Okay, so the same word that is as family is native land in chapter 11 verse 28. And why this is important? Because this shows us where Abraham came from. Okay, so God says get out of your family or from your birthplace, and chapter 11 says where his birthplace was. Look at verse 27. This is the genealogy of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begot Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in his native land, in Ur of Chaldeans. So the native land, the birthplace of Abraham was, he says, the Ur of Chaldeans, or if you do a study, you'll see that this is the land of Babylon. So God comes to Abraham in the land of Babylon and he says, get out of this land. Okay, so that's the first thing that I want you to see. So I'm going to put this actually on the board, that there was a land called Babylon. And then God says, I'm going to take you to another land. Okay, so let me show you actually what the other land is. Look at chapter 12 verse 5. It says, then Abraham took Sarah his wife and Lot his brother's son and all their possessions and that they had gathered and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. So this is the land of Canaan. Okay, I talked to you about this when Noah actually had a son whose son was called also Canaan, and he cursed Canaan, and God said, I will take you there into the land of Canaan, and he said that would be actually your promised land, because the land that was cursed, God wanted to reverse the curse and bless this land. So God comes and he says, Abraham, I want you to come out of this land of Babylon, and I want to take you here. And he said what he is going to do. He said the same thing that Babylonians tried to achieve, and I confused their tongue and I brought an end to their efforts. I give you by promise. Okay. And he said what that is. He said, I will give you a name and make your name great, and make you a great nation, and all nations shall be blessed through you. So here we have actually a name and a nation. Okay, so as I said, Abraham's name was first Abraham, and then God comes and he says, I change your name to Abraham. And the change is this, from the meaning an exalted father to the father of many nations. Someone that was esteemed high, God comes and actually takes him and makes him the father of many nations. Because of one reason, because there is something about the seed that we are going to see. So when God comes and he says, okay, I will make you a great nation, what do you expect the first thing in the natural? To have many children. Because how can you have a nation without having children? Yet it says Abraham was without a child. And while Abraham is without a child, God comes and in chapter 13, verse 15, he tells him, verse 16, he says, and I will make your descendants, which is the word seed, as the dust of the earth. Okay, so he says, Abraham, now let me tell you something. This nation thing, let me just, I'm going to actually put 3 here. So I'm going to make your seed as the dust of the earth. Okay, what does that mean? What is the first mention? Where is the first mention of the word dust in the Bible? It's Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. It says, God formed man out of the dust of the ground. So when God comes and he says, Abraham, this promise that I'm giving you is actually for all the dust of the earth. Simply man. All men. Okay? Doesn't matter what kind of man, every one. Okay? So God comes and he says, there was a nation that was entirely Babylon. I take you out, one person, and I will make you a great nation. And this, just as you came out of Babylon and they were all dust and you are dust, I'm going to actually take you something different and through you make them also to have a change, a transformation. So anyways, after this, Abraham still is childless. There is a promise to have a great nation, to have a great name, but that's not happening. Chapter 15, we read, after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision, saying, do not be afraid, Abraham, I am your shield and your exceedingly great reward. But Abraham said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus? Then Abraham said, look, you have given me no offspring. The word offspring is seed. He says, hey, you've been talking to me about seed over and over and over. You said you make me a great nation and all of that. Where is it? Like, I'm not experiencing that. You have given me no seed. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir. Then he brought him outside and said, look now toward heaven and count the stars, if you are able to number them. And he said to him, so shall your seed be. So shall your seed be. Like what? This time, as the stars of heaven. not any more dust of the earth. Okay? So right after that is the famous verse, which is quoted several times in the New Testament, verse 6, and he believed in the Lord, and he accounted to him for righteousness. Okay, so he says, and who is a righteous person? Galatians and Romans actually have so many verses on this subject, but it says it's where your identity is revealed by God. He tells you who you are and you believe it, and that is actually righteousness. So he says this is the place of where actually you begin to see things according to the promises of God. You believe that. You don't try to make a name for yourself. You realize eventually in the book of Revelation we see this, that the name of the Father is on you. So you don't have to make yourself something. He said, I will bless you. He said, I have created you. He said, I have redeemed you. So if you believe that, just like Abraham, this is a place that you are righteous. Okay? So right after that, this same Abraham who believed entertains doubt. Why? Because chapter 16, verse 3 says, at the end of verse 3 says, Abraham had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So he says, he was here and God brought him here and he gave him a promise, and 10 years passed and nothing had happened yet. So Abraham entertains some doubt, okay, like anybody else. And he says, okay, it's not happening. What do we do? And he gets some help from his wife, like Adam got help from Eve. And look at what happens, chapter 16, verse 1. Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abraham, see, now the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid, perhaps I shall obtain children by her. And Abraham heeded the voice of Sarai. Then Sarai, Abraham's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abraham to be his wife. And after Abraham had dwelled 10 years in the land of Canaan. Okay, so he says there something happened. The second wife came in, and out of her another one was born, but not according to what God had promised and Abraham had believed. This time something else was born. So God had talked to Abraham only about the stars of heaven. Okay, but after this, because we see that actually something happened through Hagar, another seed came in, and in chapter 22 it's called the sand of the sea. Let's look at here, chapter 22 verse 17. Blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendant, which is seed, as the stars of heaven and as the sand of the sea. So he says, I promised you to actually have a seed as the stars of heaven, but because you went to Hagar, you brought another seed out of your own efforts, and that's called the sand of the sea. Okay, sand of the sea. So this is where human effort comes in. This is where unrighteousness comes in. This is where relying on your own works comes in. And I mean, I talked to you about this. I think it was the second session of God's master plan. But anyways, now I want you to see something about this, that later in the New Testament, actually all these things find a meaning, and they go beyond symbolism. They become actually realities in the form of righteousness, promise, faith, children of flesh, children of the spirit, and we're going to get into that. But before that, I'm going to show you that actually this story didn't end here. Okay, after they basically Abraham he came out of Babylon, he came into this land Canaan. Eventually he had children born to him, Isaac and Ishmael. And Isaac was the child of the promise. He was the star of heaven. And out of him, the 12 tribes, the 12 sons of Israel were born. Actually, from his son, from Jacob, the 12 sons were born, and they formed a nation. And that nation quickly, we know the story of Joseph, how they actually tried to murder him, and he was sold to Egyptians, and he went to Egypt, and he became actually the second ruler in the entire nation. And then at the time of famine, the whole nation of Israel went there because they were looking for wheat, for bread. And we know the story. Eventually Joseph was known to his family and all of that. But point being, the whole nation left the land of the promise and they entered somewhere called Egypt. Okay, so they were in that place for 400 years. And God had said, actually in chapter, let me show you, chapter 14, I believe, chapter 15. After Abraham believed, God says what was going to happen. Look at chapter 15, verse 13. It says, then he said to Abraham, know certainly that your seed will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, Egypt, and will serve them, Egyptians, and they will afflict them for 400 years. So this is like way before even Isaac is born. God is talking about what was going to happen. And also the nations whom they serve I will judge, which is the nation of Egypt. Afterward they shall come out with great possessions. So he says they come out. Now as for you, you shall go. Okay, let's stop here. So what happens? Moses was born, and Moses was actually called by God, and Moses goes and brings the whole nation of Egypt out, nation of Israel out of Egypt, and he brings them to, he calls them to return, but they first come to a place called wilderness, and then they return here. Okay, so something happens in that story. The reason I'm saying, because I'm following the story of the seeds. This is the story of the seeds. Okay, so in Deuteronomy chapter 1, Moses and the nation of Israel have been in wilderness for approximately 40 years because they didn't obey the voice of the Lord. They didn't go to possess the land that God had said to them. So they've been in wilderness for about 40 years. And Moses is recounting the story. And he says in Deuteronomy chapter, I believe 1, something about the seed. Look at chapter 1 and verse 8. It says, okay, verse 10 actually. The Lord your God has multiplied you, and here you are today as the stars of heaven in multitude. So Moses says the promise that God gave to Abraham, as there's stars of heaven, you, nation of Israel, you are that stars of heaven. And anytime after that you see the story of the sand of the sea now, it's anytime that the enemies of nation of Israel are mentioned. So the sands of the sea always are the enemies of this nation of God, the stars of heaven. So for example, actually you can see this in I think Joshua. Look at Joshua chapter 11 verse 4. It says, so they went out, they and all their armies with them, as many people as the sand that is on the seashore in multitude. So he says these are the enemies that are going to fight with the nation of Israel. And he says they were as the sands of the sea. There are few other places. You can see this in 1 Samuel. You can see this in Judges that also talks about the sand of the sea as being the enemies of God. Now, something happens. So what I was trying to say, they became the stars. So this is continuing. And God says, your seed will be like the stars, but then eventually they will be like the sand. And they go out to possess the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, and they do. And David destroys all the enemies. So in this land, all the enemies are destroyed. And he dies, his son Solomon comes in, and he actually builds the temple. And that's where every promise of God was fulfilled. Okay, now, because I don't want the lessons to actually be lengthy, so you have some time to actually digest all of these things, to even have a conversation around this. I'm going to say some of the things, but I won't actually take you through the Bible. But you can actually do a search and find them. Hopefully, actually, I would be able to give you the reference, and you can read this for yourself. In chapter 15, he talked to Abraham and he believed, and he said, okay, this land I'm giving you to your seed. He said what the boundaries of their land, their inheritance was going to be. And he said it's between the great river Euphrates to the river of Egypt. Guess what? This is where the river Euphrates is in Babylon. And this is Egypt, okay? So he said this is going to be where these two rivers actually determine the boundary. So the river Euphrates and the river Egypt. Okay, so river Euphrates and river Egypt. And when you read the story of Solomon, this promise, it is mentioned to be fulfilled, which means he ruled over all the land. It says from the great river Euphrates to river Egypt. Okay, so Solomon was the time that the promise of God given to Abraham was fully fulfilled. Okay, so he said, I will make you a great nation. This is naturally, physically. There's a greater, which is actually the only point that we should take from the story. But first, I'm going to show you the natural fulfillment of the promise of God through the nation of Israel. And he says, God said, I will make you like the stars of heaven. Your seed will be like the great stars of heaven. I will make you a great nation. Your name will be great. Kings shall come from your loin. All of them were happening. He said, even the land, this land I will give you from this river to that river. And at the time of Solomon, every one of them, you can read them, you can study them in First Kings, every one was fulfilled. And that's the time that the corruption starts growing, or actually corruption in a new level starts. And let me show you in that time, what does God say about these people? So look at chapter 1 King chapter 4. This is the time of Solomon. Verse 20 says, Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sands of the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and rejoicing. So he says, no longer stars of heaven. They themselves had become the sands of the sea. Now look at the beauty of this. Look at Romans chapter, I believe it's in chapter 9. Yeah, look at chapter 9. It says, verse 27, Isaiah also cries out concerning Israel, saying, though the number of the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, the remnant will be saved. Verse 29, and Isaiah, as Isaiah said before, unless the Lord of Sabaoth had left us a seed, we should have become like Sodom, and we should have be made like Gomorrah. Okay, so he says that when the number of the children of Israel becomes as the sand of the sea, there would be a remnant. And that remnant would be, and that remnant is the seed, that unless the Lord had left us this seed, we should have all become like Sodom and Gomorrah. We should have all become fleshly. Okay? And guess what that seed is? It must be a star, because God promised to Abraham, he said, look at the heavens. This is the one that will actually be the heir. This one would be the one that would actually receive the inheritance. This is the one that will come from your loin. Now let's look at this, that in, I wanted to take you to Matthew directly, but I'm tempted to take you to Numbers, to another prophecy first, and then see the fulfillment of this. Let's look at Numbers chapter 24. This is Balaam. He's prophesying in verse 15 after being corrected by God. Finally, he says, so he took up his oracle and said, the utterance of Balaam, the son of Beor, and the utterance of the man whose eyes are opened, the utterance of him who hears the words of God and has the knowledge of the Most High, who sees the visions of the Almighty, who falls down with eyes wide open. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob. A star shall come out of Jacob. Let's go to Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east. Jesus was the star that was left as the remnant, so that through him now all the nations are being blessed. Okay, so what was the stars? The children that are born, the children of promise. And what was the sand of the sea? Children of flesh. You can call this actually spirit. So children according to spirit and children according to the flesh. So we come to Galatians. Let's quickly look at Galatians chapter 3 to see now the beauty of this story. Chapter 3 verse 16. It says, now to Abraham and his seed where the promises were made. He does not say, and to seeds as of many, but as of one. And to your seed, this is the quote from Genesis, who is Christ. Okay, now look at verse 29. And if you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. Meaning, the stars of heaven. Okay, this refers to those, the seed, which is Christ. Okay, so it says being part of the body of Christ, being one with Christ, being united with Christ is the story of the stars of heaven. And the rest are the sands of the sea. Now, this is important. No one was a star of heaven. That means no one was the seed. Okay, that means it's not to say, okay, these are the sands of the sea and that's it, and there will remain the sand of the sea. No, it's going to be, actually even there is a promise. Let me quickly say this and end with this, and we're going to pick up where we left off in the next lesson. Let's look at maybe Hosea would be a good place. Yeah, same thing, Hosea. Verse 10. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, there it shall be said to them, you are the sons of the living God. Okay, because he says the same sands of the sea are going to be called the stars of heaven, but there is going to be a change. And he says that's, Romans says, actually that's when we come to actually be persuaded, like Abraham was persuaded, because God said, look at the sea, the stars. Can you believe that's who you are? Can you believe that's the promise I have given you? And he says, once you believe that, this is the change, that you're left off, your eyes are left off from the earth and put into the heavens where Christ is. That's where you are seated. So just to wrap up this session, is to say, when God came to Abraham, he said, he promised to him that there would be, first of all the men, all children of man, all born of flesh and blood, called the dust of the earth, to be blessed. And he said, I'm going to actually bring the stars to bless the sands. So two seeds, also represented by the two covenants. The first covenant eventually is the sands of the sea, the children born according to the first covenant, and the new covenant is the children according to the promise, which is basically the stars of heaven. And this story started with one star, which is Jesus the Christ, the firstborn, and through him all the rest shall be blessed. I hope this was clear. This was about the story of the seeds, but we're gonna pick up on this star, the story of this seed, this star, that, okay, what is the promise that was made to this seed? And we're gonna pick up from this. Until then, peace, grace, and love from the Father, and may you have an amazing time and great conversations with the presence of the Lord himself.